Hello everyone, I'm Chloe Johnson and welcome to this Fresh Business Thinking webinar series, Lockdown Learning for Businesses, supported by BT. Fresh Business Thinking is proud to be part of Skills for Tomorrow by BT, which is helping 10 million people in the UK make the most of life in the digital world. Working with us and other leading digital skills, enterprise and community organisations, BT has created and collated some of the best advice, information and support in one easy place to navigate. It's easy for anyone to access our webinars as well as discover other ways they or their family and friends can grow their confidence and skills to make the most of tech. All it takes to get started is to head to www.bt.com/skills for tomorrow or by clicking on the link in the comment section. Coronavirus has been a real challenge for small businesses and entrepreneurs across the UK. At Fresh Business Thinking, we're used to putting on events, sharing expertise and encouraging and supporting networking. Throughout the pandemic, we knew this simply couldn't just stop. Perhaps more than ever, this is a time when as a business community, we need to come together and support one another. And we're lucky enough to work with organisations and individuals who are passionate about supporting entrepreneurs during this difficult time. One of those is our speaker today, Ben Kiseltug, International Lead and UK Country Manager at Personio. Ben is leading Personio's expansion across the UK and drives the company's goal of becoming Europe's leading HR software solution for SMEs. Before joining Personio in 2019, he was the Regional Sales Director at Stack Overflow, where he oversaw the company's international growth, scaling the team from 2 to 70 plus people across UK, Germany and France. Today, Ben will offer advice for other ambitious companies on how to flex and fuel growth as we tiptoe towards the new normal. Ben will be talking for around 40 minutes and then we'll have some time for a Q&A. If you do have any questions, you can leave them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and we'll do our best to get to them later on in the session. There will be a poll available at the middle of the session. Please note that this will be answered anonymously. That's all from me and I'll pass over to you, Ben.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the introduction, Chloe. And it's a real pleasure to be here. And I love the initiative that you're doing here. One of the big things that I'm passionate about is sharing information amongst each other, especially when we're in uncertain times. There's a lot that we can all learn. So really love these kinds of initiatives and really happy to be here. So everyone, I'm going to be talking to you today. Let me share my screen real briefly. I'm going to be talking to you today about growing business in turbulent times. And I think we can all probably agree that right now we are very much in turbulent times. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing at Personio to make sure that we can continue our growth through over the last 6 months or so, and also to make sure what we can do coming out the other end of this, where we are right now, to really accelerate and put the foot down and continue on that trajectory. So to start with, you'll probably notice on the right-hand side who this is. This is our core audience. It's HR leaders. And even before we actually started with Corona, we always used to say that HR leaders were the heroes of organisations, or maybe even the unsung heroes of organisations. And even more so in the current climate, we've seen that the role that HR have played in a lot of startup and fast-scaling tech companies' growth has been phenomenal. And that's been everything from moving people to remote to actually supporting their employees. So even though this isn't directly about them, we probably will touch on a couple of HR, the role of HR and how they've also managed to support us in this growing turbulent times. Before I kick in and start talking a little bit about the specifics of how we've grown and what we've been doing to manage it, I actually thought I wanted to give you a little bit of background in who we are and what we've been doing. And it'll also hopefully help you to frame a little bit about where we were on the path we were going to before this came about. So to start with, this photo was taken almost exactly a year ago, actually. I think it was 11 months ago. And this was actually in Munich in our headquarters and in our terrace that's at the front on a particularly rainy day, as you can probably see. But this was actually before our annual Oktoberfest meeting. So a huge part of our culture, obviously as a Munich headquartered company, it's essential for culture that everyone has to go to Oktoberfest together. But a huge part of our culture was to bring everyone together. And as I'm sure you can imagine, especially with myself being based in London, it's been over 6 months since I've been able to see the rest of the team. So we've certainly had to move ourselves remote on the back of this. and change a lot of the ways that we were working previous to this before. And even looking at this now, especially in COVID times, makes you feel a bit anxious putting these many people all together in a short space. But before we actually got there, and we'll certainly talk a bit about how we went remote and some of the impacts that that went with us, what's worth knowing is where we were going beforehand. And to start with, we were on a really fast trajectory. So we're only 5 years old as a company. In January, at the beginning of January, January the 21st to be particular, we announced that we'd raised 75 million in Series C funding that was led from Axel. So we were very much on that fast scale-up journey. I think we'd hired somewhere in the region of 200 people in the previous 12 months. So we were on a very fast growth trajectory at that point. And we were actually looking, when it came to revenue growth, to try and probably grow somewhere between 2 or even 3 times revenue in 2020. So we had very ambitious plans. Obviously, on the back of one of these announcements, the entire team was buzzing. There was optimism everywhere. Everyone was flying. And then obviously COVID happened and we had to change some of our approaches to this. But that hasn't actually meant that we've completely given up on growth. We're still very much in growth mode. It's definitely meant an adaptation in strategy slightly. A little bit about who we are. Chloe mentioned it earlier on, but we are the cloud-based HR platform for the entire employee lifecycle, covering everything from applicant tracking, onboarding, absence management, and preliminary payroll, all in one central tool. It has a big layer of reporting and analytics, which HR really loved at the moment to get into that strategic side, with a number of integrations on top of it. And in terms of our physical presence, I mentioned already that we have a headquarters in Munich. I'm based in our London office. We also have offices in Dublin, Madrid, with dedicated teams in the Benelux and the Nordics as well. So we're very much on that international expansion curve and really trying to make sure we can be the leading HR tech provider in EMEA. So our customer growth, I mentioned already that we're about 5 years old as a company. And believe it or not, 5 years ago, I understand that these initial wins, as you can see here, actually felt like huge wins at the time. Now they kind of look pretty small at the time when you look back 5 years, but they took a lot of effort to get those initial ones. But this is a graph of how we've grown over time. And this is our customer base growth trajectory. So you can see that we were on a really fast accelerating growth path. And this goes right up to March 2020. So it doesn't take a genius to start thinking about our growth over the rest of the year. And you can very quickly start to extrapolate this trend and get an idea about what we were planning in terms of our growth, of where we wanted to go over the remainder of 2020 before this happened. However, obviously with COVID hitting, we did have to revise some of this and look at things through a slightly different lens. And we've seen some really extreme effects on different businesses. And I think one of the things that's really clear to me is that no two companies have been affected in exactly the same way. There seems to have been some people who've been massively affected and others not so affected. So to start with, we saw some big announcements that happened that, travel industry in particular was impacted. Lufthansa posted that there's going to be about a 2.1 billion euro loss in their earnings. Airbnb, I think that everyone knows that the tourism and hospitality industries have been particularly hit. They've been saying that about 25% of their employees were unfortunately laid off. And, there's been a lot of companies who've struggled in this current pandemic. However, at the same time, I think it's worth noting that not every company has seen the exact same scenarios. So obviously right now we're speaking over Zoom. So Zoom in particular have benefited from this. They've seen their sales boom across the back of this pandemic. And I'm sure a number of you have either started adopting to use Zoom or maybe increased your Zoom adoption across your own businesses as we've moved to a more of a remote first kind of environment. On top of that as well, Amazon announced they were going to have to hire 100,000 more workers and actually try and increase the salaries of their current employees just to try and meet demand within coronavirus. So one of the big things to say is that we don't think that every company's been reacting the same. When it comes to Personio, where were we affected? We were probably somewhere in the middle. I think most B2B SaaS companies probably did fall somewhere in the middle. We very much did. So when you look at this, none of these are our customers, by the way. These are just random companies that we've taken. but you can see there are probably people who are probably more leaning one side to the other. As we mentioned, tourism, travel, hospitality were impacted. Communications, e-commerce, entertainment, very much less impacted. In fact, they actually grew a lot and actually had a huge amount of opportunity here. And for us, we were somewhere in the middle where we weren't hugely negatively impacted, weren't hugely positively impacted. And I think that's why it's quite interesting, hopefully, to share some of our insights about how we've grown in here. I think if you're sharing insights from Zoom, I'm sure they'd have an amazing story to share. However, unless you're in that very specific industry, I'm not sure how applicable it will be to everybody else. So hopefully you'll be able to learn a little or find some of these things that I discussed today quite useful about exactly where you could try and apply things to your own companies. What's worth knowing is that even though I'd say that we're in the messy middle, as I kind of refer to it on this slide, we have customers across all different segments. So Personio is very much agnostic to specific industries. It's very much a tool that is used by companies to look after their own employees and to support their own. But HR teams across every industry take a huge amount of benefit from using Personio. So even though us ourselves were only partially impacted, it's worth knowing that a number of our customers obviously were impacted at different levels on the back of this. And today I'm going to focus on 4 main areas that we dedicated and we prioritized that really allowed us to continue to keep growing over the last 6 months or so. And the very first of these I'm going to talk about is investing in long-term relationships. Now, this is something that I know a lot of companies talk about. I actually think that this is something that's a lot easier to do when everything's going great. When you have huge amounts of success and everyone's doing really, really well, I think it's very easy to talk about how we care about our customers and how we want to invest in long-term relationships. I think it's a lot more difficult to do this when things aren't going quite as well. So the very first thing that we wanted to do was to make sure that we maintained our current customer base. So for us, how do we go about doing it? This is one of those things that's a lot easier said than done. And for us, the very first thing that we did was we identified who are the companies that we felt were going to be most impacted by Corona. And contrary to popular belief, I think most people, if they think there's going to be an awkward situation, would try and put off talking to their customers or try and maybe hope that they don't realize that they have long subscriptions that are going to be problematic for them. Quite the opposite. We were very proactive about talking to the customers who were affected and reach out to them and start that conversation. Start the conversation to learn a little bit about how they're going to be impacted and what we as a provider and as somebody who works closely with them as a partner, what we can do to help them in this current time. So for us, we wanted to really focus on long-term success. We're very much the kind of company that we're not in the industry of having a burn and churn kind of culture where you have customers who sign up and then over 12 months they end up leaving and then you replace them with new customers. That's really not in our DNA at all. We're a very customer-centric company. So we're very, very at the very core of what we do is making sure that these companies who do sign up have long-term success with us. And many of the companies that we signed up 5 years ago, our very inception of Personio, are still really, really happy customers, and they've gone through their own growth journey in the same time. So for us, we wanted to really focus on long-term success, and that meant actually looking after the relationship of effective customers, and when necessary, just offering a little bit of flexibility. By doing this proactively, we actually really changed the context of the conversation. I think this really helped us, instead of being in a situation where we're maybe saying, hey, like them pushing us and us trying to be reactive to it, we were very much a case of saying, like, look, let's try and address this together. What do we need to make sure you can continue to get great value from using our tool, but also make sure that we're going to support you in a difficult time. So first of all, being proactive, but also having that long-term approach really, really helped us. One of the things I think that is probably often missed in these kind of conversations, especially when customer success or growth or however you define it are getting involved and speaking to customers, is the idea to actually understand the customer's current needs and to try and help them. I think it's all too easy to go into these conversations and start very much around, hey, you have a current subscription, like we need to make sure you're tied in for this amount of time, and leading very much on the value side of your current contract and how to retain it. And we try to do almost the exact opposite. For us, we wanted to talk to them, we wanted to listen to them, and we wanted to understand how they were affected. We wanted to understand not only how they were affected in their organization, but how they were affected from a HR perspective and what that impact would have on their usage of our tool. Would they be looking for different functionality from our tool? Were there different parts of the tool that they found they were going to invest more time into? So really leaning heavily on understanding our customers actually allowed us to do a lot of the other things that I'm going to start talking about further down the line as well. So very much in this case, maintaining your customer base, really understanding their current situation made a big impact for us as well. Another thing that we found really valuable was to offer value to our customers outside of our product. So the product in itself, in terms of Personio, can actually help companies a lot in times of crisis, which is certainly something I'll talk a little bit about. But as well as that, we realized that with all of the customers that we have and all of the different HR managers who use the tool, we're talking about tens of thousands of HR managers who are regularly using Personio. Now, when that's happening, what you actually create, either by mistake or on purpose, is you actually create a community of people who are really passionate about your product, and a community of people who are all going through the same experience of learning on the job about how best to react to the current climate. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, I think that HR people probably had one of the hardest jobs over the last 6 months. So if you do see your HR person, please tell them well done, because I'm sure that they've had a very stressful time. The one thing that we found is, particularly within that industry, with so much going on, there's a real thirst for knowledge and a demand to try and learn from each other and to learn what other people were doing within the industry. And you could probably even argue that this conversation right now, this webinar, is doing the exact same thing. It's myself sharing, hopefully, some learnings about what we did to try and make sure we can continue that knowledge sharing. So for us, we created the Expert Hub. The Expert Hub is a completely free resource that we put together purely on the back of COVID. So we did this to try and make sure we can allow our HR managers and the HR managers who use or maybe even don't use Personio to learn more about some best practice. And we started out just using some stuff from our own content team. So they work together with our existing HR managers and some of the community that we have to put together things like a Corona action plan, put together a policy for working at home with kids and what's the most important thing for people. As well as that, over time, we saw that there was a big demand for people to hear directly from other HR managers. So we've started to put together expert interviews with respected HR professionals within the community, talking a little bit about their strategy and what they did to have an impact on their community. Now, considering we put this together just to try and help in COVID times, we actually end up having about 3,500 visitors to our website every week, which is quite a lot in that regard. So this was a very much organic thing that kind of occurred. And on the back of it, this has now become a mainstay on our website that we're not just going to take down after COVID times, but we're actually going to continually allow people to share information here. And hopefully this becomes a really valuable library for people to get better at their jobs and continue learning and developing on their own side. The second thing I'm going to speak a bit about briefly is how you need to adapt to your current customer needs. And this actually all stems from one of the things I actually mentioned at the very beginning here, which was understanding your customers before you even try and go in to maintain your customers and prevent churn. So really understanding them actually gives you this information and arms you to be able to be adaptable and to be able to move quickly here. So the very first thing that we did was talking to our customers. We realized some of the functionality, which is certainly valuable in Personio, but we probably didn't appreciate just how valuable it was, were things like the absence calendar. Absence calendar and being able to track who's working, who's not, who's in an office, who's not, and where people are going to be. Are they working from home? Is there a problem? Are they off sick today? These are things that, especially in a small organization, you can kind of take for granted, especially if you're all in one office. It's very easy to look around and see who's working and who's not, and then work out if somebody's not at their desk. However, in a remote world, that can become a lot more difficult. So some of these tools, and also attendance tracking, which in certain locations became mandatory in order to do it, became super, super powerful for people. So instead of using this as an angle to market our product, we very much made this product completely free to all of our prospects. Now, the impact of that is that we actually had, I think it was over 120 companies who started to use our free version of our tool and started using it to great success. On the back of that, the sales team started to engage with them, and that's actually led to a number of customers who started with just the free version of our service, but when they had an amazing experience and saw the value of it, then expanded into becoming fully fledged customers at Personio, and are now getting a lot of value outside of this core product for us. So the first thing there that really helped us was understanding our customers, but then listening to them and making sure that where people are getting great value, we could provide to as many people as possible to really help them in this difficult time. Another thing that we really tried to focus on is changing our product for the current environment to make sure we could offer the most value we possibly could. Now, I'm hoping there's no Germans on this call because I'm going to probably do a really bad job of pronouncing this. I believe it's pronounced Kurzarbeit, but what it basically means is short-time work, not completely dissimilar to the furlough scheme in the UK. Talking to our customers, we very quickly realized that there was especially a need to start using, to tracking some of this information directly within their HR management tool, and especially when you think that the impact that has on payroll. So for them, we needed to start building out some extra functionality so they could get even more value from the product they were already using. So our product team have very militant roadmaps and are very particular about OKR setting and making sure that everything's in line. However, in these times of crisis, we absolutely needed them to be quick, adaptable, and flexible so that when we did see the demand from our existing customer base to start using this functionality, we could provide it for them. I think that this was a really big help to prevent churn on some of our customers, but as well as that, we actually had about 20 companies who came to us and said, we understand that you're doing a really good job of being able to track short-time work. We'd love to start having a conversation and see if it could be a good fit for you as well. So again, even unintentionally here, we didn't do this as a strategy for new customer acquisition, but by offering something that really added value and delighted your customers, it actually was a really nice angle for us to help us to continue some of our growth, even at times when we weren't sure whether or not this was going to be hugely valuable in advance. Pivot your approach. This is, you could probably argue that the entire presentation is about pivoting your approach, but this is very specific to the GTM or go-to-market team for us about how we pivoted our approach. So I mentioned earlier on that Personio is slightly agnostic when it comes to industry and target segments over who can start using your tool. So we had people from everywhere. We have over 2,500 customers. There were people all over the place who are using Personio and getting a lot of value from it. However, what we very quickly realized in over the last 6 months is, as we mentioned before, some of these companies were negatively impacted and some of them were positively impacted. This made a big difference to us on our go-to-market. We made sure very clearly that we wanted to try and target and work with companies who are much more in that growth mode, who are going to be experiencing some growing pains through all of this, who are going to need to upskill some of their infrastructure and make sure they have it in the right place to continue to grow. So we moved some of our marketing resources, we moved a lot of our outbound sales approach to very much target companies who are in some of the segments that we saw having a positive impact on this, rather than trying to target companies who we know were facing their own difficulties in these current times. We also, in terms of shifting resources, had to shift a lot online. So you can probably see where this one's going from this, from this first picture. But this was an annual event that we have at Personio called Hug. I think that Hug is a particularly interesting name in the current climate. I don't think anyone really wants to hug right now. But this is our HR event that we have that typically we look to have as a physical event in Munich. And last year we had, I believe, over 1,000 people attending who came together, and we had a number of speakers sharing best practice and really talking about some of the developments in HR and what we're seeing in companies. This was scheduled to happen mid-May. Now, I'm sure you can guess what was going to happen, but the marketing team had invested so much time into this to make sure we had everything perfect. And as soon as this kicked off, we obviously had to cancel our Hug event and make sure that anybody who was scheduled to come, we had to unfortunately say it's not going ahead. However, we did shift everything to online. So what that meant is that we actually have now our Hug digital event. We actually changed the timing of this. We found that particularly around the May time, everybody in HR was fairly inundated with actually internal stuff and looking after their own organizations. And this is actually now scheduled for September, so next month, in just a few weeks' time. And in terms of attendees, due to this being online and due to us being able to have this in multiple locations and it not being fixed to Munich, we're now expecting over 7,500 attendees to this session. So I think this is a really nice example of sometimes things not looking great, but being able to pivot to do something that actually is going to have a really net positive impact on your business and share the word of what Personio is doing to an even greater audience. We can also actually move the number of sessions from 100 down to 42, as there's no cap on the size of the room we're using or anything like that, to allow people into the different sessions. So we can have a lot smaller sessions and really, really high quality sessions that's going to drive a lot more engagement from us. We did also still keep the name Hug, by the way, if anyone's asking. Another thing we're big believers in, especially on the go-to-market strategy side of this, is to use data to help drive some of your business decisions. I think it's important to say, especially when we're looking at it from an international perspective for us, we've got different regions that we're investing into, and they're all at different stages. Every country is in a different place right now. I showed you the slide of us in Munich earlier on before we went to Oktoberfest. In Germany, we now have 280 employees back in the office. I think the UK is still some way behind that. We're not quite there yet. But what you'll see is trying to find out exactly where each country is actually really, really hard right now. So for example, this is two conflicting headlines that came from two very reputable sources, and they were within about 2 weeks of each other. So one from Reuters is talking about how the economy in Germany is rebounding and gathering pace, and then something from the BBC very quickly afterwards is saying how it's in its deepest decline on record. And similarly, that's not just in Germany. You also see, again, two very well-recognised brands of the Financial Times and the Guardian within about 2 weeks, one saying that the UK economy springs back on to summer spending, and another one saying this plunged into its deepest recession since records began. Now, actually trying to work out and look through the noise to find out exactly what this means for your business is really hard. So for us, looking at the macroeconomic condition can certainly help, but what you do know probably better than anyone else, or hopefully better than anyone else, is your own customers. And you know from your interactions with your own sales teams and with your own go-to-market teams, and by prospects' interactions with your company, you can get a really good gauge about where they are and whether or not you should go back into growth mode. So for us, we really heavily rely on data to drive these business decisions. So for us, that started with defining leading indicators to go back into growth mode. So we separated a number of the different metrics that we track into leading indicators and lagging indicators. Now, an obvious lagging indicator would be something such as revenue. If revenue is going up, it's very easy to say, hey, this looks like things are going well, let's start hiring again. However, one of the concerns can be that a typical sales cycle can last quite long. And depending on your business, it may be that you're missing out on a huge amount of time here between when you know that the market's beginning to pick up and when you actually realize that revenue being a lagging indicator. So for us, we have very clear defined leading indicators that suggest to us that one of our international markets is beginning to pick back up again. As soon as we see certain metrics hit, we put together a really transparent framework for everyone to follow. So this meant that we had different stages of development for each different region. And as and when we hit certain metrics, that meant we would invest more. So that could be investing more on a customer acquisition side. It could be investing more on a headcount side. But for us, we waited until these leading indicators gave us confidence that right now we can start putting the pedal down and start hiring again before throwing people in. And I think that one of the most important parts about this is, I said, be prepared to act quickly. I probably could have rephrased this slightly to be prepared to act timely, because if you act too quickly on this and you move people in, you're effectively burning cash. You would either have investment into a market where it's not quite ready to start acquiring customers just yet, or even headcount into a market that's not quite ready to acquire headcount yet just yet. Or conversely, you may do it too late. And if you do it too late, you're going to have a huge missed opportunity of potential customers who may have either decided to use a competitor or may have just completely dropped out and never consider using you again because you didn't move fast enough and you didn't capitalize on the momentum. So for us, having all of these dashboards lined up and knowing exactly where each different country is and each different region is in terms of its recovery has really helped us to know when to start expanding again and go back into growth mode. The last thing I'm going to talk about is investing in your people. And this is the one that I'm actually going to ask you to do some work from your side a little bit. So to start with, this was an article I actually read earlier this week. So it's a very fresh article straight out of Forbes. And the quote says, "Perhaps not surprisingly, job satisfaction and job motivation have also fallen. Job satisfaction from 57% to 32%, and job motivation from 56% to 36%. The entire conversation of this was based around the premise that moving to remote has actually had a negative impact on a survey of a few thousand people that they spoke to. Now, for us, I'm a big believer that different companies react to this in different ways. And I'd love to hear from yourselves a little bit about what do you think the impact was on employee satisfaction for ourselves at Personio by moving remote, especially having seen these statistics directly here. And I believe there's a poll right now that you can start voting on. We'll keep this here for a couple of minutes, just so you'll have a chance to input. Perfect. Cool. So it seems that there's a bit of a mix here where people seem to be believing somewhere between significant decrease and an increase. And the most people have actually gone for an increase, which is actually correct. So we actually saw at Personio, despite there being a big shift and a number of people being very dissatisfied across the entire industry, we actually saw an increase in our own employee satisfaction. Now, that was something we're really proud of, and I just want to share a little bit about what we had to do, or what we did, to make sure that we really did support our employees in this current time, which had a huge impact for us. So keeping your team productive and motivated, a lot easier said than done, I think, in the current climate. The very first thing that we did was to establish a home office task force. So this is from a number of employees within our organisation who came from completely different departments. They also had completely different seniority levels, but they were brought together to effectively try and represent the entire company and try and surface some of the big challenges that people were finding remote, and then to try and make sure that they could bring the company together and solve them together. They would then present to the entire company at our all hands meeting once a week to share what they were doing, what the steps we were taking, and how we were trying to make the remote experience even better for everyone working from home. Some of these initiatives included the cooking club, which kicked off with people sharing their recipes. We included an online yoga session, which allowed everyone to try and hopefully keep themselves fit and healthy, and even online meditation as well, which we started as an optional for people at the beginning of every day to meditate for 10 to 15 minutes, just to make sure that they're in the right frame of mind before starting work. And even other requests we received here included things like making sure that people had the right apparatus and equipment to start working. So be it shipping desks to people, or just making sure they were well set up so that when they are working from home, they can be productive straight away. And as I mentioned before, this actually resulted in a 6% increase for us in employee satisfaction, which I think is certainly something that we were really proud of. I don't think it's something that I personally can take too much credit for. I think it's something that our HR team in particular have done an amazing job of to keep everyone really happy. And just as a sign of our recognition there, we even sent everybody a postcard to their address just to say, keep up the good work and keep on winning from home. I'm not going to go into detail on all of these things, but some of the other things that we looked at and started doing as a company when we moved everyone to remote. First of all, we invested a lot into working parents. We understood that they had difficulties, so we gave them a lot of flexibility and support, including childcare vouchers to support them. But really, we really showed a lot of empathy and trust with our employees as well, and made sure that they felt that they were in a safe environment, especially at a very difficult time. And one of the most important things, I already mentioned the role that our HR team had in making sure that we could be really productive and have all of this. They obviously were in a situation where they were using our own tool, so they weren't overburdened with admin, and they could concentrate on some of these core projects that actually has a huge impact on every single person. So that's a lot about our existing employees, but I think that one of the things that has been particularly difficult for people has actually been with their new employees. So we have still been growing Personio, so we've still been hiring a number of people even throughout the last 6 months. And that's created challenges in itself as well on how do you support your employees in that regard. And this is something I really loved. It was actually taken at the beginning of April. There's somebody who took a photo of their setup on their very first day. And you can see that we'd already delivered them their Personio swag, including a hoodie and a laptop and even some sweets just to welcome them. But this arrived directly on their first day and made sure that that person felt a real connection to the organisation. And I think that that's one of the things that can be really, really hard right now, feeling that initial connection to an organisation, especially when you're onboarding remotely. Just a couple of ideas here of what we've seen success with when onboarding remotely is, first of all, on day one. I think this even starts before day one. I think that communication is more important than ever. I saw recently someone saying that the most stressful experiences in life are moving house, getting married and changing job. And then if you add to it, changing job in the current climate, I think that must have been incredibly stressful for people. So one of the things we actually did is have our CEO to record a webinar talking about talking about just how the person, whoever's joining Personio, first of all, welcoming them to the company, but then also just saying how their job is safe. They have nothing to worry about, that the company's in a very strong financial situation, and we're not going to be in a place where we're going to be struggling, just to try and really reassure them and make sure that company, that employee feels excited about day one and tries to alleviate some of those nerves. On the very first day as well, I think it's important to assume that there's not much knowledge in this area. Everyone here is probably using Zoom. I'd imagine not for the first time, but there may be people who are joining your company who maybe have never used Zoom before, or have never used any remote tools. So making sure that there were technical training sessions to make sure nobody was left behind was really powerful for us. And one of the really important parts for us was incorporating your corporate culture or your company identity as much as possible in the first days. We're very big believers that your company's purpose and values are the foundation of everything that you do. And they're the things that are going to navigate you when you've got this shifting and social and economic realities like we're in right now. They're almost like the North Star that everyone can follow. So making sure that you can really incorporate these into everything on the very first days really makes each employee understand what we're all doing and how we're all working together. And finally, in the first few weeks, we really encourage every employee to participate in a company-wide presentation. They're not going to have those chance encounters walking past the coffee machine with somebody. So hopefully everyone can meet them remotely, had a big impact. And then also, as well as that, making sure that each manager had very clear tasks for the first days and weeks so that people could shadow and quickly give feedback as well. Super, super important. So to recap, key takeaways. There were 4 main areas that I think really allowed us to continue to grow over the last 6 months. And I think that were big catalysts to us continue to hopefully look to grow our revenue significantly this year. The first is invest in long-term relationships to really prevent churn. And I can't stress enough the importance of listening to your customers and actually being proactive on this one to start these conversations. The second is adapt to customer needs. Again, based on those conversations you have with your customers, learn what's important and use that information to adapt so that new customers can see what you're doing and make sure that as the customer needs change, you can change with them. Pivot your approach to the new environment. So making sure that maybe, for example, with the event that we had, you do change your approach, and sometimes that can even have a greater uplift or greater impact on what you're trying to do. And finally, and probably most importantly, in my perspective, you can't tackle a crisis without your most important asset, which is your employee. And when you've been working in this current environment, we've almost been at war, I'd probably say. There's nothing that makes me happier to be at Personio, where I look around and see an amazing group of people who I'm working with day in and day out, and has a massive impact on myself personally, on my own job satisfaction. So that is everything I'm going to be speaking to you about today. I'm going to ask Chloe to rejoin the conversation. As I understand, there may be some questions I'm more than happy to try and help with by now.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was incredibly informative session. Let's have a look at some of the questions that have come in through the live chat. So there's 2 questions that are quite similar in reference to your Hug event. So putting kind of both questions into one, it's, do you think that events will stay online going forward? There's one that's one question that's coming from an events company who says they're struggling to see the potential for live events anytime soon. So what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I'm probably not in a position to certainly say like this is 100% how the events industry is going to go. I think what we'll start seeing is that there's going to be much faster advancements in remote events than we've ever seen before. So we've always seen webinars, but you can only just have to look at some of the tools that are being built right now in the online events industry to see that this is an area that's experiencing very fast growth. And I think that even when companies do go back to having physical events, which I do think will start happening, I don't know when, I wouldn't want to put a date on it, but I think people will start having physical events. I don't think there'll be a situation where you wouldn't also host it online. So I think what you'll end up happening is almost this hybrid where if people are available and they're in person, they can attend. But at the same time, I think there'll always be a big push that for remote people as well, they'll also be able to join. So I think there'll almost be a hybrid in the future.
Next question, what would you say is Personio's biggest achievement during COVID?
Yeah, awesome question. The biggest achievement, I think, was just that employee satisfaction and keeping everyone happy. I think that it's really hard in this environment to keep yourself happy, and especially when people are everyone's going through their own personal battles in this. And I think that the impact on mental health that every single person's had, we're only going to begin to scratch the surface of it. And I think we'll probably uncover much more about that in the coming months and maybe even years. We'll start seeing the impact of what's happened here. And the biggest achievement, I think, for us has been having our culture and having all the steps we took to really keep everyone together in one place. Because for us, that's been the thing I think that's really helped all of us to keep momentum and keep really pushing and making sure that we're very open and transparent and sharing with each other when it's come about.
We've had a question in from Dave, who says, you mentioned leading indicators and lagging indicators inside Personio. You mentioned one lagging indicator was revenue. What leading indicators did Personio identify, and why did you consider them leading?
Yeah, good question. I probably can't give away the entire secret sauce here. I can probably talk about some of the things that we looked at. So for us, one of the first things that we talked about that was the biggest impact is outbound pipe generation, that we saw as having a huge thing. Inbound pipe, we always saw there's going to be some people who maybe just fall on your website and do have an initial need for the tool. Outbound pipe, we found was a much harder thing to start generating. So as soon as we started to see the outbound pipe generation going up, that was a really good indicator to us. And you can probably even look at that as like there's a leading indicator that goes into the outbound pipe generation, which is purely like things like response rates to emails and the number of demos that people are booking even before that. So all of that stuff started as very, very early leading indicators. And then that was always married as well with things such as visitors to the website, people who are clicking on CTAs and what have you. So it's probably about 5 different things, I think, or 6 different things we looked at as the different leading indicators that gave us confidence that a place was ready to rebound.
Next one come in says, impressive growth in lockdown and a great presentation. We all talk about pivoting as one big thing, but I think it's continuous small pivots. Are you still making little changes to the business for growing into the new normal?
Yeah, really good question as well. I think one of the things I actually found interesting about putting this presentation together, I'd have loved to be able to say there's one simple solution, there's a silver bullet. If you do this, then everything gets back. And I completely agree with the person who asked the question, which is that there's not one thing that's going to make this better. There's a whole host of different things that are always going on that contribute to this. And I think that the interesting question isn't like what's going to be the next thing that you need to do to start making sure you can continuously grow. It's going to be much more, most of this stuff for us came from like communication, be it communication with our customers or communication internally with our own employees, and then being prepared to be agile and move quickly. So I'm a big believer that like the next thing, I don't know what the next thing we'll do is, I probably don't know, but we'll absolutely be speaking to our current employees, we'll be speaking to our current customers. And as and when we start seeing there being a changing environment and something that we can go in and try and help, both either internally or externally, that will probably be where we direct a lot of our resources and attention.
Shanice asks, I'm looking to engage new customers to grow my business. I usually do this by attending trade shows. What would be your top tip for growing my business online and approaching new customers?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, really, I guess. Like trade shows certainly can be a help. I think that you're probably demonstrating right now, Chloe, how you can still have a lot of virtual events right now. So we are actually still seeing quite a few virtual events that are going on. You can probably still try and engage with people, certainly down that route. That being said, at the same time, if you do want to move things virtually, there's probably a whole marketing strategy, you could say, to try and take things online. I don't think, again, there's a real quick solution to that. There'd probably be quite a lot of heavy development into building out an online presence and making sure that you then build like a performance marketing campaign to make sure that people are aware of your brand and who you are, and optimizing that over time.
Next question that's come in is about Personio. Are you planning on going back to the office at different times for different cities and countries?
Yep, that's a good question. So completely from our side, I think I mentioned in the presentation, we have 280 people back in Germany already, in Munich. The London team at the moment are still working from home very much. So our office is open. If people want to go into the office, they're welcome to. But based on some of the government advice right now, I think the biggest thing that happens, we survey our employees very, very regularly. The biggest concern that most employees have in London is the commute rather than actually being in the office. So commuting in itself is a bit of a challenge. So at the moment, everyone's still very working from home. And the biggest thing that I think that we can do as a company is to offer our employees flexibility and trust that they're going to make the right decision when it's the right time for them. So we're not going to say to people on X date you have to be back in the office, and there's no flexibility about that. Different countries are in different places right now, but also different people are going through different problems themselves. So for us, we're very much going to give people the freedom to make the right choice for them, and work with them to have the option available should they want to do it.
The last question we've had in is from John, who says, do you think social responsibility will become a bigger consideration for businesses when they target growth going forward? This is referring to how well businesses who've done good during COVID have been received by customers.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea, isn't it? Um, I think that a lot of companies spoke about doing good and social responsibility when the market was really, really strong. And it actually felt easier to do good. The one that we always used to see is pretty much every careers page used to say things like your people are your greatest asset. And like we really develop our people, we really invest in our people. But also outside of that, any other different areas that people start investing in from a social responsibility standpoint. And I think that John's right there, that lots of companies now, you're actually seeing exactly how much they're sticking to that. I think it's one of the very first things that people start dropping when there is times of difficulties. And the people who've really held on to that at the core of their company values, social responsibility, or even just dedication to their own employees, are actually creating for themselves a huge longer term impression. And that can either be on employees if they're looking for headcount growth in the future, but also, as John mentioned, on the customer side, people who are still sticking by this and still investing into these areas and are still supporting these areas. Those companies I don't think will be forgotten about. So while other companies are maybe pulling resources away from that and investing into other areas, I think the people that do really keep this at the core, it feels a bit more pure now. And it feels like they genuinely do have it as part of their operating principles. And I absolutely agree. I think it will have a big impact on both their customer base and maybe even like some of their talent candidate attraction as well.
Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this webinar. I'm sure our audience will agree that was a great session. Do you have any final words before we sign off?
Not really. The main thing I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you. I love these initiatives. I love the idea of sharing information in these formats. And the big thing that I really took from this as well, it's actually quite interesting to be reflective on this, is just really prioritizing your people. And for us, we wouldn't have been able to do that without having our own tool, Personio, to really make sure that we can enable our entire HR team to do the amazing job they did. And if you do see your HR people, do give them a well done. They're the people who've been the heroes, especially for us right now, in making sure that everything went smoothly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I have included Ben's LinkedIn profile in the comment section. So if you do wish to get in touch with him for further information or slides, then you can do so using that link. Our next webinar in the Lockdown Learning for Business series takes place on Thursday, the 3rd of September with Smith and Williamson as they discuss automating for cost saving and increased production. If there is anything you'd like to catch up on from today's session, we'll be sending out a replay of the webinar coming at 5 p.m. today. You can find the replay and all future webinars at www.freshbusinessthinking.haysummit.com or by clicking on the links in the comment section. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you again, Ben.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Everybody.
Cheers.